Welcome, everyone, to the Daily Market Wrap. This is the biggest charts in 30 minutes. And I just want to remind everyone, if you find some value, if you derive some value from these TA calls that we run every single day, go ahead and take a look at us over on YouTube. Check us out at defiuniversity.xyz. A lot of free educational material there. I think it's some of the best educational material in DeFi and crypto written in the English language, some of the best on the planet. So let's start things off by taking a look at Bitcoin. And over here, I think it's most important that we begin by zooming out to a weekly. And the thing that's so interesting to me about Bitcoin is I don't think this time, this cycle, it's going to be any different than last cycle or last time. And so last cycle, look at what we got. We got Bitcoin breaking down below its 200-week moving average, which is this white line here. So the breakdown below the 200-week, I think that Bitcoin is going to do the exact same thing it did last cycle, this cycle. And so the 200-week moving average for BTC comes in right now at 58K. It looks as though Bitcoin is making a beeline for that 200-week moving average. Now, it's sometimes difficult to figure out what Bitcoin trades like. It is its own asset class, but it does, exhibit a positive or sometimes negative, very negative correlation with certain asset classes. So sometimes Bitcoin can be very negatively correlated with the dollar. Sometimes Bitcoin can be very positively correlated with the M2 money supply. But we've seen those correlations break down over the last several months. And the correlation that has emerged is between Bitcoin, if I bring up BTC USD with nothing drawn on it, the correlation that has emerged is between Bitcoin and software. So if I go ahead and overlay on top of this chart of Bitcoin, if I overlay IGV, that's the software sector ETF, on a new price scale, take a look at this. This is pretty interesting, I think. So if we just zoom in to maybe like the last, the last year and a half or so, it looks like this positive correlation really started to kick into high gear recently. And if you measure the positive correlation between software and Bitcoin, it stands right now at like a positive 0.7. So what that tells me is that as software goes, so does Bitcoin. So if we go ahead and remove this, and let's just check in with Oracle. Now, why in the world does Oracle matter? Big software player. And so here's Oracle. And now let's just take a look here and let's throw Bitcoin over top of Oracle, BTC USD. We're going to throw this over top of Oracle here. And notice since Bitcoin put in its all-time high at 126K, it's basically tracked Oracle on the way down. It's been tracking software. So that makes me think that if Oracle loses this level of support here, the 200-week moving average and this trend line support, that could correspond to Bitcoin making a move down towards its own respective 200-week moving average and potentially breaking it also. So I remain short Bitcoin. And what I want to do next is take a look here at the NASDAQ and some of its MAG 7 components on a weekly. Because last Thursday, what did we see out of the NASDAQ? So here's the NASDAQ. Let's go ahead and zoom into a daily here. And what we saw last Thursday was a big move lower out of the NASDAQ, breaking support. And if we just go ahead and throw down that 100-day moving average, we got on Wednesday a break of the 100-day, on Thursday a push a little bit lower, but then on Friday, markets were saved, big bounce, but rejected at resistance. And so this Thursday, another down day. The difference, however, is that we're also getting a big move up in the MOVE index. So this is the bond volatility index. The interesting thing here is that, last Thursday, we didn't really have this big, sharp move higher out of bond volatility, but we're getting that today. why in the world is bond volatility important for us as digital asset investors? Well, because it's extremely inversely correlated with the S&P. So let's take a look at that. If we invert the scale, and then we go ahead and throw down the S&P cash index, SPX, like so, look at that positive correlation. Unbelievable. Since the April 7th tariff tantrum lows, we've seen the MOVE index be extremely inversely correlated with the S&P. So if the MOVE index is moving higher, remember I've got the scale inverted. MOVE is moving higher. If we invert the scale, that looks like it's going lower. But as MOVE goes up, the S&P tends to correct. So if that correlation holds, then I think what we should expect is, if there's more bond market volatility, I think we should expect the S&P to correct a little bit. So here's the S&P. I think that this correction could continue. Here's the NASDAQ. Notice this very similar pattern to what we saw last year, same time of year. So late February last year, we really got the start of the correction in the NASDAQ, and we're starting to get the same thing this February. Now, let's look under the hood a little bit at some of these big NASDAQ components. Let's start with Tesla. And I think the best way to take a look at this is on a weekly. But for Tesla, let's just stay on the daily for a moment. Take a look at this rejection right here. So we got the breakdown of trend line support, and then the retest and the rejection. Wow, picture perfect to the tick. If we just go ahead and zoom out to a weekly, we can see this even more clearly. So here on Tesla, we're getting this rejection at resistance. But it's not just Tesla. We're also getting it on Google. So similar pattern. We had, if I zoom in from a weekly to a daily, we had the last earnings report there for Google, and big move down, big gap down, spent the entire rest of the session after reporting earnings, just getting it back and then just fading. So the same type of rejection at what is now resistance on Google and moving down towards its own respective 100-day moving average. Take a look also at NVIDIA. NVIDIA has been trading inside of this channel for the last several months, basically just moving sideways with like a false breakout here. And now NVIDIA had put in a really big bearish engulfing candle here. So notice the body of this candle of today's session is engulfing the bodies of the two previous daily candles. So that is a big bearish engulfing, and maybe NVIDIA continues moving down towards the bottom of its respective channel here. Let's take a look at Microsoft, and this looks ugly, man. Man, really, really ugly. So this is Microsoft on a daily. But if we just zoom out here to a weekly, let's take a look at this. So this is Microsoft on the weekly. And this is really ugly, I think. So let's go ahead and remove that 100 week and throw down the 200 week. So take a look at the size of that wick, big wick on the weekly, and sitting at some support. So this trend line support dates back all the way to December 2022. So if this support, this trend line support were to break, I think Microsoft would first check in with its 200-week moving average, which is down here at 375. If that were to not hold, then it would check in with this horizontal support down here at 345. So it looks as though there could be some more downside ahead for Microsoft. Here's Apple. Big, big reversal today for Apple. If we zoom into a daily, there's the reversal, 5% on the downside here today for Apple. And, this was on the back of some news about Siri, not integrating AI features well. But whatever the reason, it really doesn't matter. The fact is that price has moved lower by 5%, in line with essentially all of the other Mag 7 items. Let's take a look at Amazon. Amazon, after reporting, gapped down. And if we just go ahead and zoom out to a weekly, here's the weekly on Amazon. Big move lower on Amazon. And we've got trend line support here, which comes in a couple of points lower at 194. But if that were to fail, if there was a breakdown of this level of trendline support, I would expect price to find its next level of support down here where we've got a confluence. So we've got this 200-week moving average and we've got horizontal support. So this is a confluence down here. It looks as though Amazon could, if it fails this trendline support, be headed down to 160. Take a look at Meta, Meta, Meta. And the thing for me is I don't like Facebook. so, but this trend line support, if this were to fail, then the next level of support is all the way down here at 480. So Meta really needs to hold support here. And the final one is Oracle, ORCL. So this long-term trend line support, there's a confluence with that 200-week moving average. Now, Oracle is software, and they've been levering up to get a piece of that AI market. So the market doesn't like that they're borrowing. And if this 200-week moving average were to fail, well, then the next level of support would be the horizontal that I'll draw in right here at like 118 or so. So it looks as though, it's must-hold territory for Oracle. Now, why is all of this important for us? If we're invested in Bitcoin, why in the world does, these Mag 7 items, the S&P, that bond volatility index, the MOVE index, and the NASDAQ, why does that matter for us? Well, because if the NASDAQ moves lower, especially if it starts to aggressively correct, I have a really hard time seeing a world where Bitcoin rallies as the NASDAQ is correcting. So even though Bitcoin has not been tracking the NASDAQ up, I think that on the way down, because the equities markets are so much bigger than the digital asset markets, if the NASDAQ starts to actually correct, I think Bitcoin would make a move down towards its 200-week moving average. Let's take a look at Ethereum. So Ethereum support, this is pretty simple now. Ethereum support comes in right here at that trend line at 1550. Fail that trend line, and I think Ethereum moves down to maybe $1,000. So really, it doesn't look like there's much of a rally at all. On the way down, we haven't gotten much of a bounce. So it looks to me like this downward volatility continues until we get to 1550 for ETH. Now, one of my highest conviction short plays right now is Solana. I really like Solana on the short side. I think that Solana doesn't really have any support in this zone. So I'm just going to draw this in. This zone here, this is just a vacuum. The move up was so fast, I think the move down will be equally as fast because there's no volume down here. And that's what we saw last cycle. So I don't think it's going to be any different this cycle than it was last cycle. Fail 95, straight shot to 35. That's what it looks like to me for Solana. So this is one of my highest conviction shorts right now. Let's take a look at some other altcoins. How about we just roll down the list here? Let's see how many we can get through over the next 17 minutes. Here's Tau. Now, I did see today that a lot of large holders of Tau have been coming out and trying to make the best of this BitTensor protocol. And hey, they've got a decent argument. Like BitTensor Tau as a protocol seems to be a very valuable protocol with a unique use case. But that doesn't mean that it's invulnerable. It's still an altcoin. And this move on the way up, if we go ahead and just circle this was a big move up. But right here in this region between 90 and 170, that move was essentially straight up. It only took about 20 days. So not a whole lot of volume there on this straight up move. And that tells me that on the way down, it might be just straight down also for BitTensor Tau. So it looks as though the next level of support for BitTensor Tau doesn't come in until $96 or so. 93, 96, something like that for BitTensor Tau. And this is one of my larger altcoin shorts. Let's take a look now at SUI, SUI. And the thing for SUI is that it's very inflationary. It's a high FDV, low float project. And it looks as though because we got that sharp move up, that we might have the same thing, a sharp move down. So I would actually be a buyer of SUI down here at like 35, 36 cents, something like that. So it wouldn't surprise me if SUI has at least another 50% on the downside. Let's take a look next at XRP, good old XRP. So this one I expect to do very, very well on the short side because on the way up, this was essentially straight up. And what was the reason for this to go straight up? Well, something about a court case, but it doesn't really matter. Now that we're solidly in a Bitcoin bear market, I think that this zone, it was basically 2 weeks straight up here. I think that we get another couple of weeks straight down here. So, no volume in this zone, which tells me that it could be sliced through on the downside like a hot knife through butter. And the thing about XRP for me is, I'm just not convinced that it's a valuable project or token. So Ripple Labs might be building something, but on the XRP ledger, I don't see much of anything. So I think support comes in at 75 cents. That would be like if the 200-week moving average for XRP were to break, I would expect 75 cents to be the next level of support. If this were to higher, the level of resistance, the big one, would be $1.77, but probably the wick, the top of the wick here for this last weekly candle. So last week's high would probably be the first level of resistance at $1.65. So I am short XRP. Let's take a look at Arbitrum, ARB. Now, we've been talking about this one for the last couple of days here. And the thing about ARB is, why? Like, why does it exist? Do layer twos need a token? I mean, probably not. Maybe if they really want it to be decentralized, but I don't think that Arbitrum is, super decentralized. So it looks to me like we might make a move down towards the bottom of this descending wedge, which is a very bullish pattern. But even a move to the bottom of the wedge, that would be a massive move on the downside. So if Bitcoin breaks below its 200-week moving average, I'd be willing to bet that Arbitrum makes a move down towards 2 cents, something like that. So I am short ARB. Here's BNB. Now, BNB is doing its best to hold this level of support here. And, it's still clinging to support, but better support looks like its 200-week moving average down here at $500. Now, if Bitcoin loses its 200-week moving average, I don't see how BNB could hold its respective 200-week moving average. So if we just zoom out here a little ways and take a look at what happened last cycle for BNB, let me go ahead and grab an arrow. So if this 200-week moving average gets tested, I think it probably breaks. But last cycle, we got a big move down to $200 on BNB. Could we see a similar move lower out of BNB if the 200-week moving average doesn't hold the support? I think it's certainly possible. This move up was very fast, big parabolic move up. Wouldn't surprise me to see a sharp move lower out of BNB, even after it's already put in this big move over the last 3.5 weeks from, call it $930 all the way down to $615. That's a big move, but it's a bear market, don't you know? So there could be plenty more room to the downside out of BNB. Let's take a look at, an EVM chain protocol token, Aave. Aave. So this is straight down. Aave just from $350, or we could even use the high, 385, straight down and put in a trough at 93. That's a lot of volatility. But most important to me is that level of support that failed for Aave. So if we zoom in, we can see that level of support. Here's the daily. Here's that trend line support. And when that trend line support failed, if we zoom in here, you would expect there to be a retest. And we've got, so far, one retest and rejection. And here's the second. and getting a rejection here. So it looks to me like the next stop for Aave, assuming Bitcoin doesn't rally, the next stop for Aave would be the October 10th lows at $80. And then if that were to not hold, then I think Aave would enter this zone, this channel here, and maybe move all the way down to 50 bucks. So I'd be a buyer of Aave in this zone. Now, I opened up two fresh short positions, one of them on Arrow, the other one on Fartcoin. And just taking a look at this Arrow chart, this is one of the sharpest, fastest moves up of the charts that we've taken a look at so far during tonight's session. And that's straight up right there. So I think that we could easily see Arrow repeat that pattern on the way down and move straight down from, what is that, 30 cents, 28 cents as support down to 12 cents. That's a 50% move. I think we could see that quickly, very quickly. This is a reward token. And Aerodrome, all sorts of incentive mechanisms, but this is a reward token. It should, I think, go to 2 or 3 cents, maybe that, maybe less than that. So, getting short Arrow at 29 cents is a gift, in my opinion, because I expect this to move much, much, much lower. Okay, maybe something like a couple of pennies. So, I'm going to hold this one until it gets to at least 12 cents. Here's Fartcoin. Fartcoin had a big bounce today. It was like plus 7% at one point during the day. Big bounce at support. So this is, that low from just a couple of days ago. We found some support here. There's that level of support that I've drawn in, and it's bouncing. But look, this is, about the shittiest of the shitty. Like Fartcoin here, it's a real shitter. It's a meme coin, no use case. And, this thing probably goes to zero this bear market. But, being able to get short Fartcoin at 18 cents and write it down to, support down here at 2 cents, that's a great trade, in my opinion. That's a potential 82% on the downside. Would not surprise me to see Fartcoin go absolutely to zero. Let's take a look at AVAX. AVAX, I think that this is an interesting chain, but I don't know why. Here's the thing about AVAX. It's one of those chains that has all sorts of partnerships with different, large companies. There are a bunch of video games that I guess have launched on AVAX, but ask yourself this question. Why does a partnership or a video game launch, why does that mean AVAX, the token, number go up? Why does a video game launching on AVAX or a partnership with Amazon or whatever, why does that mean AVAX, the coin, number go up? It doesn't. It doesn't. There's no connection between a partnership and the protocol revenues and whether they're going to be distributed to token holders at all. So a lot of these things really just depend on user growth, I believe. And if we're not seeing unique active users grow on the AVAX chain, then I would expect AVAX to make a beeline back down towards $3. So that's a big potential move on the downside here for AVAX. I am not short this one simply because I prefer to trade on GMX, and there's really no liquidity, not enough anyway, to get short AVAX on GMX. So I'm just watching this one from the sidelines, but I do think that this is an interesting short play. Let's take a look at a couple of other memes. How about SPX 6900? So I think the holders of this are going to have to wait much, much longer for that super cycle that they all keep talking about. And we got a little bit of some support here at 21 cents, but look, this is just straight down. And again, another meme coin. So if this really starts to accelerate again on the downside, I think it might find, solid support at zero. Here's Doge. Now, the thing about Doge is that Elon Musk likes it. And I think he's about to launch X Payments or X Money. I think he calls it X Money. And if they decide to integrate crypto into X Money, which I think that they will, and if Doge is used for anything important on X Money, well, then maybe Doge has a pump again. But at the end of the day, this token should probably move much, much, much lower. I mean, there is no reason for this to have a multi-billion-dollar market cap. Let's take a look at Link. Again, this is a protocol that is very useful, but you've got to ask yourself, just like AVAX and just like the rest of them, even if the protocol is useful, why does that mean token or coin number go up? Like, if there's no connection between the protocol and the token, then it's a meme. Okay. And I'm not saying that Link is a meme coin, but I don't see the connection between Link and protocol revenues. So, and I'm not quite positive that Link actually generates a ton of free cash flow either, that Chainlink generates a ton of free cash flow. So, this thing, although very useful, and the Chainlink protocol and the oracles are like, one of the core primitives in DeFi. Hey, you know what? I think number go down for Link. And I see support in Link down here at $5, the bottom third of this green zone here. So that's still plenty of room on the downside for Link. I am no longer short Link. Here's XMR. So Monero privacy coin, and we were talking about this the other day, that it would potentially get rejected at its 200-day moving average. That is exactly what has happened. And take a look at this pattern. This is a bear flag. This is a bear flag. So if this were to complete, we would see Monero down here. So that would be a big move lower out of XMR. I am no longer short XMR, but this looks like an interesting entry to initiate a fresh short. Here's Ondo. So Ondo is just struggling to, hold this, flash crash from October 10th, the lows there. Now, Ondo had one of the biggest flash crashes on October 10th, which tells me that it's just illiquid, extremely illiquid, negative 70 some odd percent on October 10th. So yeah, very illiquid. And if this really breaks below those October 10th lows, basically is where we're trading now, then there's no support, none at all. Ondo could go down to a couple of pennies. So this is actually an interesting short play. And you could say that this is a head and shoulders pattern. You could say that for sure. And that would mean that there's support for Ondo at maybe a couple of pennies, something like that. Let's take a look at Hyperliquid, Hype. So, here's Hype. So Hype got rejected at its own 200-day moving average, but then found support at trendline support. You see that there? Here's the 200-day rejection. Here's the trendline support. And, it might just keep bouncing around between resistance and support. But if Bitcoin really starts to move lower, then I don't think Hype will be able to hold this support. The next level of support comes in at $20. If that were to fail, then we might be looking at $10 on Hype. Let me zoom out here to a weekly real quick, and let's just take a look at Hype on the weekly. Sometimes when in doubt, zoom out. So what do we see? Well, not a whole lot. It just looks to me like we got the pump, time to give it back. Okay, we've got 2 minutes left. I want to wrap things up here with the dollar. So the dollar did break down below that long-term trend line support here. It found some support here. I drew in just another trend line, but it's continuing to move to the downside. And that's likely because rates are moving sharply lower. So here's the yield on the 10-year, the 10-year US Treasury moving sharply lower this week. And with lower yields, you would expect the dollar to continue to move lower. So if the dollar moves lower and yields move lower and crypto can't manage to put in even a relief rally, well, that just tells me that digital assets are very, very weak here. And we may see further downside, especially if we get more upside out of equity market volatility. So this is VX. This is equity market vol and big bull hammer candle. Now this is mean reverting. So if we get a big pump, I would expect it to mean revert, but maybe down to a slightly higher level. So just want to go ahead and wrap things up here. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining the call live. I appreciate all of you. Please, if you're looking for high level and beginner level DeFi and crypto education that is totally free. Take a look at defiuniversity.xyz. Everything there in the DeFi University course hub is totally free. And join us on School. All of the content in School, all of the courses in School, all of the material that I post every day in School is totally free. It's school with a K, SKOOL.com/DeFi University. Thanks so much for joining, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Have a good one.